Welcome to DC Insiders, where we bring you sharp views about global issues with relevance to Taiwan from the political capital of the world here in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Wenchi Yu. In March, President Trump issued an executive order to eliminate the U.S. Agency for Global Media, USAGM, which oversees Voice of America and other U.S.-backed news outlets like Radio Free Asia and Radio Free Europe. USAGM is an independent agency of the U.S. government that broadcasts news and information for regions of the world with less press freedom. It is considered an arm of U.S. public diplomacy and soft power. To understand the implications of Trump's order on democracy and press freedom in Asia, today we're speaking to Bay Fang, President and CEO of Radio Free Asia. So welcome, Bay. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Share with our audience, what is Radio Free Asia? I think a lot of people have heard about Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, Voice of America, and all these different agencies. How are they different?
So Radio Free Asia was founded after the Tiananmen Square massacre happened in 1989. So a bipartisan group of senators came together and decided that China needed to have a service where people who live inside China could get access to the truth of what was happening around them, to what was happening around the world. And they made it specifically different from Voice of America because they wanted it to be a private, completely nonpartisan company that got a grant from the U.S. Congress to operate. We're a private nonprofit. Voice of America's mission is to tell America's story. They also do a lot of political news about, about the world.
This is Radio Free Asia. The following program is in Chinese.
中国的听众朋友，您好，欢迎收听自由亚洲电台的亚太报道，我是李亚，
我是鲁南。
在这次节目里，我们首先为您介绍香港、台湾与日本三地对保钓领袖陈玉祥。
We are the only ones that actually do what's known as surrogate broadcasting, which is actually broadcasting in the local languages, in some cases in several dialects of Tibetan, for example. We have the only Uyghur service in the world, but we basically are covering the stories that are censored within China and outside.
And most of your funding comes from U.S. government support?
100% of our funding comes from the U.S. government. And there is a very clear firewall, so there is not supposed to be any interference in our editorial decisions. So we have 9 language services. So just into China, we broadcast in Mandarin, Cantonese, Tibetan, and Uyghur, the only Uyghur service in the world. We broadcast in Korean into North Korea. And then in Southeast Asia, we broadcast in Burmese, Cambodian, Laotian, and Vietnamese.
And so these listeners can actually access the content of your programs without any obstruction?
That's right. Well, it depends on what place we're talking about. So in North Korea, a lot of it is shortwave and radio. We did the only annual survey of North Korea media consumption, which wasn't representative because we were talking to people who had made it out, so defectors, travelers in South Korea. And year upon year, about 20% of them said that they listened to RFA on these radios that they had actually had to, rejigger so that because they're sold, soldered to the official channel. So they would listen to RFA in the middle of the night.
So even if you say this is a private company or nonprofit, but its funding comes from the U.S. government, and very clearly that the content is broadcasting out is very much aligned with the U.S. values in terms of democracy and human rights. So some people have critiqued all these related agencies as part of the U.S. government propaganda. What is your feedback on that?
Yeah, so it is the last thing from propaganda. I mean, the Chinese government would like to use that talking point and to dismiss all of our reporting as U.S. propaganda. But the reality is the only way it reflects U.S. values is because we believe in freedom of the press. So the idea is just actually to have a factual, unbiased news service that relates the truth to people in these different countries around Asia, just like our sister organization Radio Free Europe does in Europe.
We need to talk about Trump's executive order, which is calling for the elimination of all these related media outlets, including yours. And the reason was given was saying how the content of the programs are not really aligned with U.S. values, and it's a waste of money. What is your pushback?
Basically, we are one of the most low-cost tools of U.S. soft power that you could imagine.
What is your annual budget like?
$60 million. A drop in the bucket when you look at the billions that China is spending on the same kind of influence campaigns around the world. We are, the executive order said that we are no longer effectuating administration priorities. And when you look at, especially on the national security side, the priorities of this administration and the priorities of the last two administrations, including the first Trump administration, China was the biggest national security strategy. The Chinese government, Xi Jinping, the CCP, the constituency that they're most afraid of is their own people. And what we do is give these people access to the truth. If we wanted to actually challenge the authority of the CCP, information is where you do that. And they realize that. That's why they are, trying to buy up or influence newspapers, broadcasters around the world, and bringing journalists on exchanges to China. About a year ago, we created a Pacific service, so servicing islands in the Pacific that, they do have free press, but they're very cash strapped. They lack a lot of resources. And when I visited the national broadcaster in Papua New Guinea, they were undergoing a digitization process that was completely funded by the Chinese. But they were so happy about what we were doing, which was basically doing reporting by locals for the local population that we or allowed them to share freely, so on whatever platforms they wanted to use.
As you said, this administration has laid out that China is their number one competitor, and even some would say adversary. And so how did you communicate with this administration in particular when the executive order came down? And what is their response?
Well, we were never given a chance to speak to any of the new leadership of USAGM. Carrie Lake, after she came in and brought in the Department of Government Efficiency, she just wrote us Doge. She just wrote a letter to all of us saying that our grants were hereby terminated. That was March 15th. And we actually sent in a response and communicated by email how we felt we were actually effectuating administration priorities, and there was no reply. And we have never been given a chance to talk to them.
I want you to know I'm hard at work here in Washington, D.C. I'm working to make sure that we are not being bilked out of our hard-earned dollars. And we're going to make sure we're doing everything we can to cancel contracts that can be canceled, save money, downsize, and make sure there's no misuse of your dollars.
As you know, we have support from both sides of the aisle. Some of our biggest supporters, including, Secretary of State Marco Rubio when he was in the Senate. And so we have never heard any specific complaints about our reporting. In some ways, we think that we could just be collateral damage because of their desire to make changes to Voice of America or USAGM more broadly.
The importance of a free press cannot be overstated, and Radio Free Asia continues to provide this for countless people around the world.
There is a good argument, I would say, a compelling argument to most Americans that what the Doge is doing or this administration is doing is trying to make sure our resources are used well. And so looking back, do you think USAGM and all these related outlets could have been more effective? And you have said that, for example, Radio Free Asia was created right after Tiananmen Square. And obviously, the broadcasting communication methods and channels have changed. What efforts have gone into modernizing, perhaps, the delivery of information gathering, etc.?
Yeah, we have always been a very lean organization, and one of the reasons that we were created as a non-government agency is so that we could be nimble in the ways we try to reach our audiences, the way we measure our audiences. In FY22, we were given a 30% budget increase, which I think was a recognition of the challenge that we were up against. We created an Asia Fact Check Lab, which actually pushes back on disinformation coming from China on Chinese social media. We also created an investigative service that has done breaking news on such things as the undercover police stations that China has placed around the world. So we basically looked at what China was doing around the world, how they were trying to censor not only their citizens inside the country, but also the growth of their censorship and influence in Mandarin speakers around the world, and then also in third countries. And
what are some of the examples that you can?
When you look at Mandarin speakers, even here in the U.S., there was a study done by Purdue University of their graduate students. This was a few years ago, and the only graduate students that actually became more anti-American the longer they were here in the US were the Chinese. And that was because all of the news they were consuming was through Chinese social media still. As you know, that is a complete bubble, and it's still very much controlled by the CCP. There's very few divergent opinions that come in. So what we did was we created something called Why Not? In Chinese, it's Why Now? Basically just giving a different perspective, and it's focused on this young post-Tiananmen generation of young Chinese, wherever they may be. It's using different, more engaging ways of addressing issues that they're not sort of hard politics or human rights issues. It's about health. It's about the economy, things that people know they may not be hearing the whole story about, but they don't have a ready multimedia kind of platform they want to get to. And that was also a very good way of getting our stories into China, because these young Chinese would see it and they would find ways of getting it to their friends.
You have said that China is spending billions
Yes,
of dollars
a year,
on this
yeah.
kind of campaign, whether it's in country or in other parts of the world. And so on dollars, just purely based on that, there's no way the US can compete with, and no one else can compete with China, whether it's in English or in Mandarin, right? So what is the point of trying to compete with China? And the other question related to that, some may argue the younger Chinese generation pretty much feel like they can access information from any part of the world. It's not so much about the information that they consume, but more about the very concept of what political system they may prefer. They may not like the CCP ruled country, but a lot of them would say, especially the younger generation, they don't like the current American system as well. So how do you counter these arguments?
So it's about what kind of America we want to live in. I think that people, even young people inside China, it's true that they, it's not enough to just give them a VPN. A lot of people don't find the need to go outside what is effectively an intranet that China has created inside the country, which is why you need to give them content that is compelling enough to draw them out. We have found that once they have a taste of the information that they are able to get, they become addicted to that. They are interested in knowing about the rest of the world. And it's also true that we can't compete on the same level as the Chinese in terms of the amount of money that they put in. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. I would argue that much of their propaganda is seen as propaganda. They are not as good at this kind of thing as we are, and they're putting in that amount of resources is because they're trying everything. They are playing the long game, and this is through the wolf warrior diplomacy. This is through these content sharing agreements that they have created with cash-strapped media around the world, even in places like Australia, like Italy, places where there is free press. When I was talking about some of the very small, very cheap things that we have created that push back on Chinese disinformation and malign influence, the Asia Fact Check Lab, we were the ones that during the Taiwan election, we saw that there was this fake poll that suddenly came up and no one knew where it had come from, and it showed that the opposition candidate was leading, and we tracked, basically we followed the money. We saw that it had been actually funded by a CCP funded organization. That may be a small thing, but you could say the democratic elections in Taiwan, it's all part of a greater effort and a belief in the values of freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the idea that information should be freely available to people around the world.
Clearly, under the Trump administration, public diplomacy or this kind of value-based efforts are deprioritized. A lot of people see that, whether it is the elimination of USAID or agencies like yours. What do you think the longer term impact is on America and for the countries where access to press freedom is not really an option?
Yeah, well, you can see it already in the countries where we broadcast to, where our voices have been silenced. There was the huge natural disaster in Myanmar, and whereas in the past we actually had more shortwave transmissions that we put in there. USAGM helped us fund surge transmissions so that more people could get news about this was Cyclone Mocha that happened a few years ago, and people really relied on us for information, and that was when the internet was cut around the country. This time around, and especially under this military coup, we were unable to get that kind of information to people inside the country. The work that we've been doing in a place like Myanmar, very few people have been able to do it. We still have people on the ground. They are undercover. They're not using their own names, but they are still feeding us information. And we have such a reputation there that people chose us as the reporters to go to when, for example, a Myanmar army soldier dropped a cell phone on the street, which basically contained images of him, murdering people, committing war crimes, basically. When a villager found it, they gave it to a Radio Free Asia reporter because they knew that that was the only way to get this information to the public. I think the longer term effect on the US is the reputation. For years, we were seen as that country that people wanted to come to. My own parents came here in the 60s for graduate school from Taiwan because they wanted to get the opportunities that it was seen that only America could afford. They wanted to bring up their kids in that environment, and I think that will change. That's something that takes a long time to build back up.
Do you think these agencies will be reinstated with, perhaps the departure of the Trump administration? And even if they are, do you think they can still be as impactful?
It's really hard to say. I think even if we win these lawsuits, we've already had to let go or furlough so many people, and they will do what's right for their own families, their own situations. Many of them will look for and find other jobs, and it takes so long to find that kind of talent, not just talent, people who are good journalists, but people who are so committed to this work that they're willing. I mean, in some cases, the Uyghur reporters saw their families picked up and thrown in jail for the work that they were doing. And they still wanted to do it because they saw it as their calling, that they wanted to tell people about what was happening in their homeland. And it will be really difficult to build that back, even if we do get our funding restored.
Do you think it's possible that these efforts may be picked up by local organizations or even other broadcasting outlets? Are you seeing other outlets that could potentially play this role?
I think it will be very difficult. So in many of the countries that we broadcast to, we were seen as the last man standing in terms of independent media. In a place like Cambodia, we were kicked out physically from there in 2017 with all of these other independent media, and but we still had people operating, and we had a really amazing Khmer service based here in DC that knew how to get information out of the country. Similarly, in Hong Kong, I think we were seen as the last sort of bastion for independent media. I do think that there is a space for people who especially want to do exile journalism and are able to do that. Other media organizations have been coming to us to learn some of our techniques. But I do think that having all of this ability and talent and courage in one place was really unusual and difficult to put back together.
So what do you have to do now? We talked about how the executive order was issued, but then obviously there's lawsuit fighting against that, and then there's the court order that actually blocked the execution of the order. Is that right? And then so
it's complicated.
Yes.
So basically, we won a preliminary injunction from the district court. The government appealed that. They won a temporary stay, and then we appealed that decision and we got a stay of the stay, and that's where it is now, and we're waiting for the entire appeals court to issue a ruling in the matter, and then it's possible that it will be appealed up to the Supreme Court. So that's where we stand now legally. They are actually right now, because we won the stay of the stay, they are supposed to be dispersing our funding, and they haven't yet. The last disbursement we got was our April funding, which was already a month late, and now they're a month late on our May funding, and that's why we're in this position where we have to keep furloughing and keep laying people off, because we don't have the consistency or the money to keep payroll going. Basically.
Yeah, people need a salary.
Yeah.
They still have a family.
That's
they have
right.
to raise. And have you been able to produce news?
Yeah, but minimally. And we are actually having different services go dark based on a number of different reasons, not about their strategic importance or anything like that, but just because of how many reporters they have overseas. We're trying to keep people protected who are on work visas, who would then have to go back to countries where they might be targeted. So it's a combination of things. It's sort of a puzzle that we're having to work with.
So do you have to close down Radio Free Asia, essentially?
No, we have closed down some language services, and more will come. But we are trying to keep Radio Free Asia solvent for a few months while for the foreseeable future, I should say, while the lawsuit wends its way through the courts, and while I think our friends in Congress are trying to figure out what might be next.
Well, thank you so much for actually staying put and continuing the fight for your employees as well as the organization's mission. I wish you the best.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for watching DC Insiders. Please follow us on social media to get the latest episode. See you next time.
We bring you stories from Taiwan.
Every day of the week.
Our reporters travel the nation.
Exploring the issues that matter to you. News from here in Taiwan and around the world.
What's up, Taiwan? On TaiwanPlus.